Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. How mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
We can stop it now. Well,
If you were...
That was good. The other commercial I looked at, they didn't have loads, but it was Fred and Barney out back avoiding chores from their wives having a Winston. And I kid you not, it's a great little commercial there. Well, I bring that up because, we look for certain symbols in what we trust. Whether it's the logo of the nation that we cling to, whether it's the expert wearing the lab coat or having a badge or being able to show you some sort of documentation, then we say, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And I always wonder if God got the memo. Because I don't think Malachi is wearing a lab coat, even though he's talking about the refiner's fire. I think Malachi, John the Baptist is patterning himself after him, really understands what sort of presentation we need to have in order to give the message of good news. The picture we have of Malachi is of a very mysterious figure coming out of the wilderness, coming out of the desert, saying that, the Lord has got a message, and the message is this: it's going to get tough. I'm always amused as a pastor that whenever we have a series of headlines which are very challenging, the first thing people say is, must be a sign of the end times, because they can't wait to bail out or bail up. I'm out of here. I'm afraid, like I told you last year, that rapture thing, that was made up just a couple centuries ago. It's not in the Bible. And trust me, when times get tough, when the Lord does decide it's getting intense, you're not going anywhere because he needs you in the ball game. You want him to send in the second stringers? Anyway, he tells us we will be tested. The prophet Malachi. But there's good news. It sounds like bad news. I don't want to be tested. I don't want to live in difficult times. I don't want to turn on the TV not knowing if there's been another mass shooting. I don't want to know if a politician has said something even stupider than what they said last week. But I live in these times, and God is counting on you to stick to the gospel message and not to the easy message. That in the face of death and terror, our message is, well, we're going to kill even more of them. It's not that. Our message is that God is ready now to use us as a witness in tough times. As Malachi says, the offering to God is going to be pleasing like it was in the ancient years. That like the saints of old in the time of suffering, you are going to look fantastic, and God is going to look good because of you. As Paul writes to the Christians at Philippi, he is writing sitting on death row in the city of Rome. Prison in the ancient world wasn't where you served a sentence. It's where they held you till they had the trial. Then they decided what they were going to cut off, how much they were going to beat you, or if they were going to kill you. Or you might get released, as happened to Paul a couple of times, but we know the last time it didn't, and he's probably writing during his last imprisonment. And we have this picture of a desperate Paul sitting in a cell by himself, writing this letter to the Philippian church. But that's not it at all. He's not alone. First of all, he's narrating this letter, and somebody is writing it down for him. And the reason he's got somebody there to write down for him is because people like the Philippians and the Corinthians and the Ephesians and the Colossians don't forget him. In times of persecution and trouble, they send people to him in prison to feed him and take care of him and watch over him and stand up for him. Just as we are called to stand up with each other in times of trial. so that we don't face difficult times alone, but that we do visit the hospital to share with each other, that we do pray with each other, that we send cards of encouragement, that we let our Nigerian brethren know they are not alone, greeting them when they come to our country and sending our folks to them. Paul says that in our common good news that we have been sharing from the olden days until now, I am able to write you with joy because of the prayers you are making. He begins with a message of joy. He is writing to the Philippians, who in some ways I identify with. You know, when I was a kid, I didn't have a hometown. I was part of a Navy family, just like Jenny was. So we moved all over the country all the time. We didn't think of ourselves as belonging to a certain state or to a certain city. We felt like we were just part of something bigger. Philippi was the city upon the great Via Egnatia, the great east-west road in Macedonia, where people who had served in the military would retire to if they survived. It was a city that was very much a Gentile city with people from all over the empire, and the people that lived there felt like they were something bigger because they were citizens of Rome. They were not citizens of Macedonia or Greece or Asia Minor. They had all the rights and privileges of Rome, even though many of them had never seen Rome. And Paul has been letting them know in his letter to the Philippians that they're part of something even bigger than Rome. He tells them specifically, you are citizens of heaven. And so he can say to them that because of this, my prayer is that love grows in you greater and greater, and it's made known in your suffering. And he goes on to give an example of how in times of trial God can work great things. In the 13th verse, he talks about his imprisonment, and he says, because I am a prisoner. Everybody in the praetorium, everybody, in other words, that is part of the Roman court and all the others know that I am a prisoner for Christ Jesus. Because we stand up for Christ in difficult times, people will know that the reason we're willing to say, turn the other cheek, the reason we're willing to say that we will love our enemies and do good for those who hate us, the reason we pray earnestly for those who preach hatred is because Jesus did, and we're going to be like him. Can we defeat it with love? Paul thinks so. Jesus thought so, or he wouldn't have allowed himself to be nailed to the cross. Do we believe? Or are we going to believe the experts? The people with the right badge. The people with the right credentials who tell us how it is we're supposed to believe. Well, this past week, thinking about this terrible massacre in San Bernardino, which isn't that far from where my mother lives, it felt pretty close. And then this morning, I got this message through a friend of mine about what his son wrote, David Miller. David Miller was in my first church. He was just a little kid, always had a good perspective on life. I was able to officiate at his baptism, works at a ski resort. And David wrote, that devastating massacre in San Bernardino occurred less than 30 miles from my work and 10 miles from Pam's work. That's his wife. I was listening to the tragic events as they transpired live on the police scanner in my office. Shortly after the initial shooting, San Bernardino County sheriffs were stationed in our ski resort parking lot and on the highway out front, keeping an eye on things and checking cars as they drove past. It was very surreal and unusual hearing the emergency responders speaking rapidly with such raw emotion and elevated trembling voices. When they were finally able to stop the suspect's black SUV, I could clearly hear on the radio scanner a lot of gunfire and officers in the background yelling at each other and at the suspects also. And after the last gunshot, there were several commanding voices screaming, hold your fire, hold your fire. The next radio traffic proclaimed, officer down, officer down. Within moments, the law enforcement vehicles left the ski resort and took off like racehorses bursting out of the starting gate that had just been stung by Texas-sized hornets. Well, that's a lot of stuff, David. The surreal became real when I learned that I actually had met two of the people who lost their lives that dreadful day. Sadly, the first was Tin Nguyen. She was 31 years old and born in Vietnam. I met her at the ski resort when I was in charge of governmental compliance, and she was the health and food inspector for the county. The second was none other than the shooter himself, Syed Farouk. I met him under the same circumstances as he was also a health and food inspector. I still have health inspection documents from the last several years with their names and signatures on them. It's only a few decades ago, and we laugh at them now, that we saw commercials like that with doctors telling us about our T-zone and how important it was to smoke the right cigarette so that it would allow us to breathe better. Big ads in Life magazine. And we trusted them. And we know now that the cigarette companies knew very well that their product caused death. And they allowed those commercials to go on anyway. We live in a culture which is in some way allowing this to happen, that we feel frozen. We can't do anything. I don't know if we can. But I do know that, as we learned last week, we have hope in Jesus Christ. And we are either willing to follow the gospel in tough times, or we shouldn't even bother. Because if the gospel's only for good times, what hope do we have? And that as Paul celebrates the love that grows and grows and greater in the Philippians and in the empire because of his imprisonment, so too, our response has to be love for those who are impossible to love, prayers for those who think that in some way they are serving God through these horrible things, and faith that God is in control of history, and that if we are faithful, God is ready to do great things through us. And what that takes, I think, in the end, is grace. There's an amazing grace, which is not just about our salvation and fire insurance, saving us from the fire, but a grace that saves us in the fire, like the refiner's fire, where we are proved true as gold. We will be proved true as gold now if we repudiate the haters and proclaim the Lord of love. Our little bit of special music this day is a song about the grace of God and the peace that comes even in difficult times. And after that, we'll have a little responsive litany. And because it's my birthday, I decided we're having cookies right afterwards. It's on me.